David stood in his corner office, looking out over the city below. The skyline was his kingdom, and as the CEO of a rapidly growing tech company, he felt invincible. His days were filled with board meetings, pitches, and constant strategizing, all leading him toward the success he'd worked so hard for. At just 32, David had become known for his sharp mind and cutthroat decisions. He was praised by investors, admired by his employees, at least those who didn't question his methods. His company had been thriving, and David was certain it would continue to climb. But there was one thing that had always bothered him, something he rarely acknowledged. It was the people who worked in the background, people like Maria. Maria was a janitor at the company, quiet and unassuming. She had worked there for years, cleaning the hallways, emptying the trash, and making sure the office was spotless. Her work was unnoticed by most. To the executives and managers who roamed the floors, Maria's job seemed as insignificant as the dust she swept away. David hardly ever paid attention to her, and when he did, it was usually to look down on her. He saw people like Maria as nothing more than cogs in the machine. She wasn't important, not in his world. He often thought of her as just another faceless employee who kept the place running while the real work, the important work, was done by him and his team. She didn't matter. It was on an ordinary Thursday afternoon when the incident happened. David was walking through the building, on his way to a meeting, when he saw Maria in the hallway. She was pushing a cart full of cleaning supplies, her head down as she mopped the floor. "Maria, do you have any idea how much time I waste stepping around your cart?" he called out, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Honestly, do you even know what you're doing here? You can barely keep up with your work. Maybe it's time to hire someone else." Maria paused, taken aback by the insult. The hallway fell silent as David's words echoed in the air. She didn't speak, didn't defend herself. She just lowered her head further, the sting of his words cutting deeper than she let on. The few employees who overheard the exchange snickered, and David walked past, his confidence swelling as he continued down the hall. To him, it was nothing. Just another reminder of how untouchable he had become. No one would dare question him. Maria's life outside the company was far from the pristine office halls where David ruled. She lived in a modest apartment, tucked away in a quiet part of the city, with her young son, Tomas, and her elderly mother, Rosa, who had been battling a chronic illness for years. Her days began early and ended late, filled with long shifts at the tech company, along with cleaning houses in the neighborhood, to make ends meet. Her son Tomas, though only 8, understood more than most children his age. He knew that his mother worked tirelessly to provide for him and his grandmother, and he cherished every moment they spent together, even if it was brief. Maria didn't tell him about the harshness she faced at work, how people ignored her, belittled her, or dismissed her. She didn't want him to worry about her struggles. To Tomas, Maria was a hero, a constant source of strength. Rosa, too, leaned on Maria. She had no other family, and while her health was deteriorating, Maria remained by her side, tending to her needs and offering comfort. It wasn't easy, and Maria often went without sleep to make sure both her mother and son were taken care of. The exhaustion was always there, lurking just beneath the surface, but Maria never complained. She couldn't afford to. There were bills to pay, groceries to buy, and a future to fight for. At the company, Maria kept her head down. She did her job without complaint, even when others overlooked her or treated her with indifference. The insults, the rude remarks, they were nothing new. She had learned long ago to ignore the sting of cruel words. The work wasn't glamorous, but it kept her family going. Every sweep of the floor, every trash bag she took out, was a step toward providing a better life for Tomas and Rosa. But there were moments, small moments, that made her feel seen. There was Anna, the receptionist, who always smiled and asked how she was doing. There was Mark, the junior engineer, who made sure to hold the door open for her, and would occasionally leave a cup of coffee on the ledge by the janitor's closet, his way of saying thank you for the hard work no one else seemed to notice. Maria didn't seek out these small acts of kindness, but they were a lifeline, a reminder that not everyone in the building saw her as invisible. Still, she never let them distract her from her true purpose. She had a family to support, a life to build, and nothing, especially the words of a CEO like David, could take that away from her. The once thriving tech company David had built began to show signs of strain. What had seemed like an unstoppable force in the industry now faced growing competition from newer, more innovative companies. The market was evolving, and the technology David had relied on for so long was becoming outdated. His decisions, driven by pride and a desire for faster growth, started to catch up with him. At first, the signs were subtle. A missed opportunity, a failed partnership, a product launch that didn't go as expected. But soon, the cracks began to widen. Investors who had once showered him with praise began to express concern. The company's stock dropped, and the tension in the boardroom was palpable. One morning, as David sat in his sleek office reviewing the latest financial reports, his phone rang. It was his biggest investor, one who had been a pillar of the company's success. The voice on the other end was stern. "David, we've been patient, but things aren't looking good. You need to make changes, and fast. If you don't turn this around, we'll have no choice but to pull out." David's stomach churned. Bankruptcy. The word hung in the air like a heavy weight, suffocating him. He knew the company was in trouble, but he had never considered the possibility of failure. His mind raced, but his pride wouldn't allow him to admit any wrongs. He would fix it. He had to. "I can handle this," David responded, his voice barely masking the panic. "I'm not gonna let this company go under." But deep down, he knew he was losing control. Meanwhile, Maria continued to move through the building, unnoticed by most. She mopped the floors, took out the trash, and cleaned up the messes left behind by the executives who walked by her without a second glance. Her own world, too, was becoming more difficult. Tomas was growing, and with every passing day his needs were expanding. Rosa's health had worsened, and Maria found herself juggling even more responsibilities outside of work. But she didn't complain. She couldn't afford to. Despite the growing pressures in her personal life, she remained focused at work, putting in the same quiet effort as always. Little did David know, Maria was one of the few people who truly understood the building's inner workings. She had been maintaining the building's infrastructure for years, everything from the heating system to the security measures. If anyone knew how the company's operations could fall apart, it was her. Yet, David's arrogance blinded him to this fact. As his empire started to crumble, the one person who could help was the one he had insulted. The one who was always quietly in the background, making sure everything ran smoothly. It didn't take long for the inevitable to happen. The collapse of David's company was swift and brutal. In a matter of days, the investors pulled out, and the once thriving business that had filled the skyline with ambition and hope was reduced to nothing more than a broken dream. The offices were eerily quiet as employees gathered their belongings, unsure of what the future held. Some were angry, others were scared, but most were simply numb, stunned by the speed at which everything had unraveled. David stood in his corner office, staring at the empty chairs in the conference room. The voices of his employees were now distant echoes. The decision-makers he'd relied on were all gone, and his once glorious company was now nothing more than a shell. He felt the weight of the failure in every fiber of his being, but there was no one left to blame but himself. His pride, his arrogance, had driven him to make reckless choices that had ultimately cost him everything. As the company's operations were shut down, the employees left in a blur of confusion. But in the midst of the chaos, something unexpected happened. A report surfaced, a detailed log of the building's operations, systems, and infrastructure that had kept the company running smoothly. It was discovered that Maria, the janitor, had been quietly overseeing key aspects of the company's maintenance. While everyone else was focused on profit margins and product launches, Maria had been managing the facility's systems, everything from the temperature control to the wiring and security. She knew the building inside and out, far more than anyone realized. When the board members and investors realized Maria's role, it was too late. David had taken her work for granted, never once considering how much she contributed to the smooth functioning of the company. In fact, her knowledge had kept the building running on its most basic level when things were falling apart elsewhere. It was a revelation that hit David hard. He stood there, in the middle of the chaos, realizing the painful truth. The very person he had humiliated, the one he had called worthless, was the one who had quietly kept everything from falling apart. Without her, the collapse would have come even sooner. The weight of his arrogance crushed him. He had dismissed her as insignificant, but in reality, she had been the backbone of the entire operation. David's pride had blinded him to the value of the one person who had always been there, quietly working to ensure the company's success. Now, as the pieces of his empire scattered around him, he couldn't help but feel the sting of regret. As the dust settled and the remains of the company were picked apart, David walked through the empty halls, his thoughts heavy with regret. The building that had once represented his success now felt hollow and desolate. He had lost everything: the company, the admiration, and most of all, his sense of control. His arrogance had led him down a path of destruction, and now he was left with nothing but the bitter taste of failure. But amidst this chaos, one thing stood out: Maria. David had always looked down on her, never understanding the depth of her role in the company. But now, with everything crumbling around him, he saw her in a different light. She had been the silent force that had kept things running. The person who ensured the company's operations never faltered, even when he had failed to notice. One evening, after the last of the employees had left, David made his way to the janitor's closet. He found Maria there, as she always was, quietly finishing up her work. The hum of the cleaning machines and the faint sound of her mop against the floor filled the air. "Maria," David said, his voice filled with a weight he had never felt before. "I owe you an apology." Maria paused, looking up at him with a mix of surprise and calm. The sight of him, once proud and untouchable, now standing before her humbled, was almost surreal. "I've treated you terribly. I've taken your work for granted, dismissed you, and, well, I was wrong," he continued, his words heavier than he'd intended. "You've done more for this company than I ever realized. I owe you more than an apology. I owe you respect." Maria, though taken aback by his admission, remained composed. The hurt she had carried from his insults still lingered in her heart, but she was not the type to hold grudges. She had her own battles, her own burdens, and in that moment, she decided that forgiveness was the only way forward. "David," she said softly, her voice steady, "I don't need an apology. I'm not angry. I've always done my best because it was the right thing to do. I'm moving on now. There's no point in holding on to the past." David looked at her, a mix of guilt and admiration in his eyes. He had never expected her to be so gracious. He realized that while his world had collapsed, hers had quietly endured. She was stronger than he had ever given her credit for. As fate would have it, Maria's quiet strength didn't go unnoticed. A group of investors who had been searching for a leader to help rebuild a new tech company from the ashes of David's failure approached her with an offer she never saw coming. They recognized her knowledge of the building's systems, her resilience, and her dedication. Maria, with all the grace and poise she had shown in her work, was offered a chance to lead a new tech startup. David, now humbled by his fall from grace, watched from the sidelines as Maria embraced her new opportunity. Her life was changing for the better, while his own journey would be one of redemption. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he had learned a hard lesson about humility, respect, and the value of those who often go unnoticed. Maria's rise was a testament to her strength, while David's fall was a lesson he would carry with him. Both of them had been given a new path, one where growth was possible, and both found a way to move forward. Maria with newfound respect and opportunity, and David with a renewed sense of humility and purpose. If you enjoyed this story and the powerful journey of growth, redemption, and second chances, don't forget to hit that like button. It means so much to us. If you haven't already, subscribe to our channel for more emotional, inspiring stories that will make you think, feel, and reflect. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Comment below with your favorite part of the story, or share your own experiences of overcoming challenges. And if you think your friends or family would enjoy this story too, be sure to share it with them. Thank you for your support. It helps us keep creating content just for you.